Hey English 112, Ms. Brewer here for your week 2 lecture video. So this week we're going to get into discussion forum for content when we're going to discuss Othello, and you guys are going to be finishing up Act 1 and Act 2. Well, Act 1 you should have finished last week, and then Act 2 for this week. So make sure that you're keeping up with the reading. So you are going to, I want to go over a couple of things. Make sure you have Moodle open. You do not have to look at my face. You can follow along with what I'm saying and while you're going through Moodle with me. So if you need to pause me to pick up Moodle and go with me, feel free. So you're looking at Moodle, you have your agenda, you're watching your video now, great job. For your discussion forum, your initial response needs to be turned in by Thursday night, and then a reply to 2 peers by Sunday night. You need to be reading Act 2 of Othello, and your journal is your attendance assignment, so you'll respond to the questions for the journal for your attendance assignment this week, also due Sunday. I have a note here on discussion forum grading so that you understand how I grade your discussion forums. Make sure that you answer completely all parts of a question. Oftentimes I have open-ended questions, or I have questions that have multiple questions inside. Make sure that you're addressing all of the questions inside of the question. Because we are talking about a text, we're talking about Othello, do be sure to quote the text and cite evidence directly from the text while you're talking about it. If you're choosing to use a different format than the PDF that I provided of Othello, please just make sure that you put in a parenthetical citation, and you guys should know this from English 111, but you don't have to put Shakespeare and all that. We are all reading the same play, so we know who wrote it, we know what the play is. What I need to know is what act, scene, and line number you're citing, okay? So that's in the parentheses, act, scene, line number, Act 1, Scene 2, line 131, okay? The word count that I put there is for a reason. The word counts are a minimum, so I'm looking for a minimum of that. I do not usually put a cap on it. If you go a little over, that's not going to be a big deal, but do make sure you're meeting the minimum word count requirements. In your peer responses, and this is super important, it is not your job to evaluate your peer responses. So you don't need to say, great job with your response, I really liked this, or I think you didn't really cover this particular topic. It's my job to evaluate the post. What I want you to do with your peer response is to add on to their thoughts or challenge their thoughts, pose questions to further discussion, those types of things. What I don't want to see is, hey Bob, I agreed with everything you said. You said this and I agree, with no new content being added. That's not a substantial reply. So a substantial reply means that you are adding something new to the conversation, giving an example of your life that you've experienced that addresses that, or an example of a tie to another story, or a tie to another character, or looking at it from a different perspective. But your replies should not just be, I agree, I agree, I agree, okay? That's not substantive, that's just you typing a reply. If you read something and you're like, oh yeah, I agree with everything, but I have nothing else to add, move on to another post till you find something to say that's worth saying. Grading, so for your discussion boards of 50 points, if they're a 50-point discussion board, then the initial post is worth 30 points, and then each reply is worth 10. If it's a 100-point discussion board, which sometimes they are, then the initial post is worth 50 points, and each reply is worth 25. If they're not substantial, if they're not meeting the word count requirement, if they're not including the text, that's where you're going to lose points on those things. Okay, going back into this week, so we talked about your discussion board. We are talking about Iago this week. Iago is super interesting, so definitely make sure that you pull out some information from Iago to back up your opinion. Then you have your journal. So your journal is due Sunday, and it's an attendance assignment. 200 to 300 words is not a lot, especially considering each question has like 3 questions within it. Make sure you include specific examples from the text. You can, journals that are content-based, They can be wrong, so be aware of that. So you can be marked present and still not get an A on the assignment if you didn't know the answer and didn't write a correct answer. A lot of these are opinion, so it's hard to be wrong about an opinion so long as you are pulling evidence from the text. I highly suggest that you put the work in here in your discussion forums and in your journal entries, because you can go back to these when we write a paper on this and you will already have quotes that you've pulled out with citations. So make sure you're doing that now when you don't have a whole lot of work to do, so that later when you have to write a paper, you're not scouring to find this stuff. You should already have it from your posts and your journals and notes that you take as you read, which is super important. If you guys have any questions, feel free to shoot me an email. I'm happy to help you. And I will check in with you next week when we move on to Act 3. Have a great week.